Thank you so much for doing this. A warm welcome to you and to our panelists, Abhishek and Shubho as well.
Great. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. That's very kind. I've never thought of myself as any sort of like stardom. My mom will be very excited to hear that. Yeah, it is an honor to be here. And good evening to all of you. It is July 7th, and you have joined the last session for today. This is a panel discussion titled, How Do We Deliver Innovation and for Reconfiguring Market Research? Today's session will cover 4 areas around innovation in market research: consumer centricity, and I'm sorry that I'm a little bit tongue-tied apparently, and the transition to CX, and that involves staying ahead of consumers and understanding the consumers of tomorrow. The second leg of the stool is staying agile, and that is incorporating the voice of the consumers into the agile processes to foster innovation. The third is transitioning from consumer and market insights to human insights. And lastly, championing the new wave of digitization and focusing on innovation. We have 2 panelists that it's a huge honor for me to introduce them. Abhishek Sehgal, Head of Consumer Insights in APAC for Google. And so Abhishek, welcome. It's an honor to meet you. And by the way, I will be trying to get both of you on the show, on my podcast later, selfishly. And Subra Bardam, VP and Head of Consumer Insights for Kotak. I practiced this earlier. Kotak Mu Drum. How do I say it?
It's Kotak Mahindra Bank.
There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, well, welcome both. Subra, I'd love to start with you today. Today, successful businesses have to anticipate what consumers will want in the future. That is remarkably difficult, right? Because the crystal balls don't actually work in the same way that they used to work when things were just a little bit slower. How is consumer centricity, or CX, helping businesses stay ahead of consumers so that businesses can win?
Yeah, so I think specifically, the industry that I come in, right, it's all about, customer service is considered to be a differentiator, right? So in most of the cases, if you see, service sector where in multiple categories, the players are consolidating, right? So you can see that service becomes a differentiator. So when service becomes a differentiator, you need to kind of engage well with the customer to really understand their need. And if you understand their need, you can always innovate and stay ahead of the curve. So I'll put it to you in an example, right? For example, in a banking sector, there are a lot of, way due to which a customer would visit a branch, right? And for very simple, silly issues, right? For example, to change your phone number, to change your address, to change your PAN card, to change your, local address, and so on and so forth. There are a plethora of things. Those are some of the stuff that can be done online, right? We have something called a DigiLocker, right? It's a repository of biometrics, for us. Then we have something called an Aadhaar card, right? They're all, integrated. The only thing that you can do is basically combine everything, and you authenticate and you verify. And a simple innovation can change life of the customer, right? Then people to kind of come down to the branch and do some transactions. So everything can become digitalized. Now, how do you expect some of this? You expect some of this when you kind of engage with customer, and you know that, coming down physically, it's not only a burden for the customer, but also from a branch point of view, you have to kind of maintain it, right? You need to have people, you need to have multiple branches, and it might be feasible in metro or tier 1 city. But if you go to a tier 2, tier 3 cities, it's not feasible to have a branch within a district, right? Which constitutes of maybe 15 to 20 villages, right? So a small innovation can cater to a lot of people, right? Similarly, your entire digital KYC. So I think right now Kotak is one of the bank. I think it was the first mover who did, and the one to start off with for an entire digital KYC. So we have a product called 811, right? Via that, you can actually open your bank account from home, and your entire KYC actually can be done digitally. So plus the entire address change, right? So it might not seem to be such a significant jump in metros and tier one because everything is accessible. But think of it from an India perspective. So that's one example I wanted to cite. Other tactical information or tactical innovation can also happen, right? Which is not necessarily an innovation. For example, in our world of digitalization, we would often see that in the entire app funnel, customers are getting stuck at different stages, right? So, for example, we also have something called a K-mall, right? And there, suppose some sets of customers have built a cart of maybe an Apple product and they have not purchased it, right? So again, the anticipation or the insight there could be that he wants to have it, but currently maybe he can't afford it, and maybe he's waiting for maybe his salary or his bonus to kind of go ahead and then pay and then make the transaction. So one simple solution maybe then for us is basically to provide a EMI to that particular customer, right? That's how you can innovate and you can always stay ahead of the curve.
It's interesting how the digitization of banking. So it used to be the case you had to go into a branch, right, a physical location in order to do a financial transaction, like get money to give to somebody else. And now it's the case that I think very few people actually do that. It's interesting that the digitization is really benefiting in a lot of ways people that didn't have access to branches. It's really democratized access to financial transactions that were outside of what outside of what I would say lower socioeconomic communities would be able to support. How important is that community to the banking industry?
It is. I mean, having said so, I think you still know that tier 2 and tier 3 cities are the base, right? That's what in Indian term we called Bharat, right? From a population point of view, they are there. And in the last 2 years, a lot of things have changed. I think Abhishek would know it much better, right? Because I think they were one of the pioneers to kind of spread awareness to this smaller tier city along with some other players. So the entire digital currency, which is basically UPI, right, that got popular via some of these platforms that's there, right? So the entire strategy has also changed, right, in some of these cities. So people have a lot of ambition in such cities, but due to lack of infrastructure they can't adapt, because YouTube is open to them, right? Or the other news medias are open to them. They are getting a feeling of what can be done, right? From an investment point of view, from a banking point of view, from a transaction point of view, and all the convenience point of view. It's just that the motivation is there, but the infrastructure is not there. So what has changed right now is basically now with UPI kind of coming in, that has substituted your cash transaction. So that's one jump that has happened. I think the next set of jumps will happen through your virtual banks or virtual mode of adopting such consumer into the foothold.
And if I may, I may just add to this. This is interesting because I think if I have to just summarize into one line, it would be that tech is having such a profound impact on our lives. And then the double click is it's having the same impact on the lower socioeconomic strata, the democratization theme, Jamin, that you talked about, and then funneling down even to research, right? And we as a community therefore need to think how we are innovating in that space. Markets like India or emerging markets uh, you know will always deviate from the normal. talking about India, Indonesia, Brazil, some of those markets, even Africa, we'll see leapfrogging happening in a very big way. And what Shubhra was talking about, that we never had a credit card break even moment in India, but we have a very high digital penetration as far as financial transactions are concerned. We saw similar wave happening 5 years ago, where even today, not a vast majority of the population owns a desktop or a laptop. We just leapfrogged it, and smartphone was the first device where people experienced internet. So we will see those kinds of phenomena happening. I think what we need to think about, therefore, is from a tech perspective, how research fraternities sort of keeping up with the pace of changes.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how the economy has transferred in the last 10 years to a global framework. YouTube is a really good example of this. YouTube, some of YouTube's top channels, or at least they used to be pre-COVID, were out of India, as opposed to North America. And so, now all of a sudden, as an advertiser, it has a humongous unlock for you in terms of accessing communities that and monies that you simply didn't have access to before.
True.
Well, let's move on to the second question. Abhishek, I'll direct this one to you. So consumer centricity, it requires putting the consumer at the head of the table when we make a business decision. This is harder the faster that we make decisions. I'm reminded recently, I was speaking with somebody at McDonald's, and in that conversation, they were saying how they're really trying to leverage trends in TikTok. One of the biggest challenges that they and everybody is facing is that the trend framework is being so truncated that by the time that it's identified as a trend and a concept or maybe some ad concepts are brought to the decision makers, the trend is now over, and those timescales can be measured in even in a week or less, which is amazing. And with Gen Z actually categorizes themselves from a structural perspective as a generation of change or a generation of short-term trends, adaptability in that framework. And so when you're thinking about the speed by which businesses have to gather the consumer's point of view in order to make a business decision, how are you incorporating the voice of the consumer in your agile processes?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I think what is happening is that there is a very fundamental shift happening in which we generate insights as well. A couple of years ago, and when you look at non-digital businesses today, every business is digital, right? Every company is a digital enabled company, even if it's not a tech company, right? But I think a couple of years ago, there used to be a very structured way of doing it. Insights, CMI community within an organization had they were the full complete owners of that process, right? And from that lens, one can talk about agile insights. How do you reduce the timelines? How do you have consumer connect programs, etc., etc.? I think we need to think beyond that. And today, when you're sitting in a strategic discussion, it's not just people like us who bring insights to the table. You have a lot of first party data, right? And Shubhra will agree with me, where you can mine. So you'll have wonderful data scientists coming up with their understanding of it. On top of it, you have a lot of social media data coming in, which typically your media teams would also be able to do synthesis of. So I think what we need to do, therefore, is not just stick to our core, which is what we are good at, but also develop this ability of connecting with our stakeholders, right? And agility is important, but also holistically looking at stuff and then innovating. And there are very good examples of, I know a very big CPG company in India, and they completely looked at generating insights in a tangential manner out of their customer service helpline number, right? So those are some of the things that people are doing, and we need to think from that perspective.
Yeah, it is. I'm not saying that we're moving away from primary market research, but the opportunity to access consumer insights in a variety of different ways, whether it's just what hashtags are trending, right? Which you might not own if you're not the social media company, but yet all that information is publicly available. Just is a humongous unlock. The other thing that really stands out to me, I was recently. I'm friends with the head of insights from Adobe, and he and I were on a speaking together at a conference earlier this year, and one of the things that stood out. Well, there's a couple things that stood out. One is that he's actually elongating insight primary research processes now, and shortening the actual production of the report. From a timescale perspective, because he's involving stakeholders in the various processes. So from the spending more time in the formulation of the survey design or the discussion guide, spending a little bit more time in field socializing the results as they're coming through to the stakeholders, and spending more time in the analytics phase socializing the impact that happens. And then the actual report is more of a roundtable discussion with the stakeholders on what actions the business is going to take based on the insights that were gained. And so it's a different way of delivering consumer insights where you're involving the stakeholder in the process a little bit more, which in a lot of ways gets them closer to the consumer faster because they're connecting with the research process. Is that something that you're seeing?
Absolutely, and maybe that is the other discussion topic that we had for today, and it's a good segue over there as well. But before I go that, just an afterthought, maybe to build on the previous discussion as well. For example, you were talking about hashtags, right? And from a Google perspective or other social media perspective as well, there is. I think the realization for us has to be that there is so much data out there. Are we keeping ourselves abreast with using that data? And if we are able to get an understanding of what all is available, then agility becomes part of our system and whatever we do. And just to give you an example, if we have Google Trends data, and I speak to so many friends in the industry, and I speak to some of the clients in Google as well. We have as advertisers, and not many people are aware that Google Trend data is freely available, and as a base point generation of any category insights, it's a good starting point, if not final conclusive thing. So all I'm trying to say is that we should acknowledge that there is tons and tons of data, and tech companies have also invested in terms of dashboarding it, and the output is also fairly user friendly. It'll just help us to be more agile.
Yeah, Google Trends it's the best kept secret. Ironically, I'm friends with Wesley Chan. He was involved early on with creating Google Trends, and it's like my single superpower, just being able to access that and see what's trending, and relative to creating a community of followers for my podcast. And it's it's so funny how people, I think, oftentimes overlook just like that simple, easy to use, very consumer. It's almost like a B2C product. It's so easy to use.
I think another thing, just to add on that point, is basically right now it's also in digital. We have this liberty, unlike probably a CPG. We have to we don't have to be perfect on inciting. We have to get the right direction, right? because a lot depends on your execution, right? So you can have awesome insight, but if your execution is dull, then it's all gone, right? And we don't have huge leverages, because then what happens is you can do multiple experiments, right? Going back to your original example that you have cited. So for instance, typically traditionally you would do a year-long research followed by concept testing, followed by pre-ad testing, then a post-ad testing, and then eventually launch a particular ad. Today you would not have to do that. You can just have multiple insights, make multiple creative, again give it to Google, and run it for a week, and you know which ones will have a higher uptake and which one will have a lower uptakes. Based on that, you can actually go and blast it in your traditional medias and stuff. So those are also some luxury or liberty, right? And again, very quick, maybe dipsticks with some consumer. What are the likes and dislikes and so on and so forth to tie the knot, and then flesh it out a bit more from a post-production point of view, and then go live. So this is something that probably would not take a lot of time, and it's typically going to be a 1 year or a 6 month project at least in a CPG environment. That is also something that has changed considerably, because you now can blast it and then move into the next phase of whatever your creative thought process happens. So if I wait for that aha moment, then I would probably miss the jump bus basically, and then the trend would go and then something else would probably come up.
I love your quote there, and I'm misremembering it slightly, so I do apologize. But we don't have to be perfect; we have to provide a direction, and I think that's exactly right. And direction is very much like, I like the analogy of navigating the ocean, where you have constant changing currents and winds and et cetera, et cetera. And so in that environment, we have to always be part of the decision-making process, which is a continual state, as opposed to this like very clearly defined start and finish state that we used to live in. Kevin had asked a question in the chat, and I feel like it's a good opportunity for us to address it as a panel. And he asks, with social media, it has been very easy for consumers to compare products and hence their change in preferences. How do we keep up in terms of innovation with this fast-paced consumer demands and needs? I have a point of view, but I'm going to wait and see if you guys have one.
Yeah, I think this was a self-reflection. I ended up tweeting this, that a large company's cannibalization concern is a small company's innovation bet. And that's probably that is happening right today. And with the D2C coming in, direct to consumer coming in in a big way, I think the big companies need to relook at it, and they would always have this dilemma. Today, I think if you have an idea, even in very well-established categories where power in the market, distribution, availability, capex sort of are big entry barriers, direct to consumers has sort of broken all those barriers. And if you have a good brand promise, brand story in a niche space of innovation, you can have a viable business, and you can scale it up to a certain level. So I think it's not that in big companies, at least my reflection, that during our research we don't unearth those opportunities, but then when you are at the discussion table and decision table, it's a company's call whether to invest behind it or not. And then more often than not, you end up taking a decision against it, because for you, like I said, it's a small opportunity or a cannibalization sort of scenario. And you were the first ones, because you have all the might to listen to consumers. You have a team of wonderful researchers doing that. But I think from an investment perspective, you took a conscious call. And that's where I think we lag behind versus unearthing those micro niche spaces
that become category killers later.
True.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things, like subscription razor services. Who would have thought that was a thing? And it's a big category now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, but that's where the entire point of execution comes in, right? So if you see a lot of the stuff that's happening, I would not say cool stuff, but yeah, a lot of the stuff which is happening specifically in fintech, it goes via bank, but banks are not doing enough what fintechs are doing, right? Let's put it in that particular way. So it's not that they don't get all those hooks, but it also comes down to innovation at the end of the day. I mean, execution, sorry, not innovation. So if your execution is not well baked, and then I think in terms of demands and needs, I think another lens, I'm sure Abhishek would also do it constantly from an insight point of view, to filter out what are hygienes and what are differentiators, right? So your hygienes are the one, if you don't deliver, then your product will be killed or brutally kind of damaged, whereas differentiator would actually give you a niche basically, and a competitive advantage per se. But if your hygiene is not there, no one's going to use you, because there are plethora of options that's currently available in the plate of consumers.
I would add to that, one of the big opportunities, and this kind of like piggybacks on both of your points, is the impact that influencers are making on the purchase decision. So it used to be the case before the the consumer journey, that if I needed something, I would go to a store and I would buy what I needed inside of the store. And my comps, my comparables were whatever was on the shelf sitting next to the cereal I wanted or what have you. Digitization, of course, completely disrupted this linear journey to be one that is, very loopy and unusual and difficult to follow. Now with social media, what we're seeing is, again, a simpler purchase journey, which is really exciting for marketers. So now, if I'm on my smartphone and I'm scrolling through TikTok and I see some content that I like, especially by an influencer, then I can look at that content, consume it. I can like it. If I like it, then I'm going to make a decision if I'm going to follow that person. If I follow that person and there's some sort of an interaction, now there's an opportunity for me to trust that person, that influencer. And then if I trust that person, then there's a bond that takes place. So you've got these very clear processes that are happening, or stages that are happening on the consumer journey. And what happens is the brand now has an opportunity to bypass discovery and like in order to get to bond and trust, by having that influencer represent their brand. And in that framework, there's no comps, there's no comparabilities that are taking place for the consumer. And so the consumer is looking at it saying, oh, okay, they like this, I like that, I'm going to go on whatever platform and acquire that product. And so it's an interesting simplification of the model, and also oversizing. In fact, I just did a study. 92% of people that I surveyed are, and this is not global, this is North America centric, are have actually made a purchase in the last month because of something that an influence that they've seen from friends or family on social media. So it is a material impact on the consumer journey. All right.
But I have a slightly different point of view. I think traditionally influencers were always there. I mean, all the big brands used to be endorsed by, all the celebs and stuff. So I think influencers were there then, influencers are there in present. What has changed is basically with the power of data and all information, as Abhishek mentioned, you can micro-target consumer. So you now don't say the same narration which you would say while you kind of do a TVC and play that on a channel. Right now, the same ad, and also with the power of innovation, would come differently, maybe to an Abhishek, maybe to you. So those micro targeting, micro customization have made it more sharper, and then the insight and the proposition actually becomes more relevant to the consumer.
Yeah, well said on the ability to be able to connect at a micro, or identify an audience at a micro level. Like, it's interesting to me, low IR or incident rate audiences, hard to reach audiences for market research, used to be impossible or cost prohibitive, and now all of a sudden you have access to them using things like AdWords, right? So anyway, all right, Abhishek, let's talk a little bit about our third question. I know we're running just a little bit long, so I do apologize. I'll try to move this along. So, it used to be the case that a good consumer insight report had hundreds of pages. In fact, literally, I was told by Levi's that, and this goes back into the 90s, that my reports were too short. I would provide them an executive summary, and my stakeholder at the time said, "I need your reports to have a thump factor." And I'm like, "What is that?" And they said, "It needs to make noise when you drop the report on the table." If you can believe that. And so, but today I can't imagine doing that. Executives, they need insights that are packaged completely differently. In fact, the measure of a good report is, in a lot of ways, the story that your stakeholders will take from you and then tell to their constituents inside of the organization. So how are you leveraging consumer and market insights to turn them into human insights that connect?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think gone are those days, and I really love this quote, and I don't know who said this, but it goes something like, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, from a attention span as well. So we in Google, I think it's embedded in our DNA. I'm happy to share with the forum over here as well, that all our reports, outside of research as well, all our documents, etc., typically have TLDR attached to it. TLDR, for those who might not know the acronym, too long, don't read. So it's a bullet point summary of whatever, even a 5-pager that you have created. So typically goes in the body of the email, but really gives the crux of the summary. But yeah, having said that, I think sometimes long form is also important. I think there is sometimes when you get into deep dive and you really want to nuance things long form, there is a case for long form as well. So I think we should step back before sort of thinking of how to bring the insights to life. And then depending on what is the objective, if there is a one-time project versus continuous projects, maybe I'll talk you through some of those examples. So I think for continuous projects, one of the things that I can share from a Google standpoint is that we do an annual report for our external partners, advertisers, which is called Year in Search. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's somewhere started in India and APAC, and now scaling globally as well. But basically, we looked at Google Trends data, synthesized it, and came up with an annual report in terms of what is it that people are searching on Google. And then over the years, what we've done is we've created some branding and a timely frequency around it. And I think that's something that we in the market research fraternity can also think about. Our large continuous projects which have annual frequency, how do we sort of give a branding element to it, awareness creation, and execute it and activate it like that. So that's one part. Then I think newsletter is another phenomenon, right? And Jamin, because you yourself are a podcaster, you'll realize that today, I think visits to websites also have decreased. Apps in general, a lot of consumer behavior engagement happens within app. But then if people have hobbies, interests, topics that they are interested in other than social media, there are creators who are delivering it into consumers' mailboxes. So why can't we take a leaf from there and have newsletters for some of the things that we're doing, and again, make it a quarterly, monthly affair depending on whatever the objective is. So that's another thing. And then from a tactical standpoint, I think visual stories are again few things that work very well. Infographics are really something that resonate well. Again, we as researchers, some of the neuro stuff that we tell our stakeholders, if we take it back and say that, between reading versus AV kind of stimulus, any user, any receiver would want audio visual. So visual stories, infographics also are good hacks and tactics. And finally, one thing that we do a lot in Google is gamification, especially for some of the tentpole events that we do for our clients, where, once there was a shopper journey study that we had done, and we were trying to sort of tell our advertisers what is the footprint of digital in today's shopper journey, what is the footprint of offline channels. And we actually gamified it by, asking folks who attended that conference to take a guess of what would be the contribution of this. And then once you solve that, it's a puzzle, it's a gamified thing. You get the final output as well, and it tells you how closer or how far you were from knowing your own consumer. And this was for their own category. So again, a good way of engaging through some of these tactics. But broadly, yeah, this is a broad landscape. And if the audience in this forum, they want to check some of the things, shameless plug, but you can go to Think with Google, and in the customer consumer insights section, you will see few examples of infographics as well as visual reports. Something for us to learn from a research fraternity as well.
Yeah, I think it's important. I in fact, yesterday I created a report where I leveraged cohort analysis, and Google Analytics does a really good job of cohort analysis in web traffic. And so anyway, I continue every time I do cohort analysis. I actually start with that as like my framework for what I'm gonna create, even though it's a completely different set of data. It's just the way that it's laid out is actually is super clear. Super, we're almost at time. Do you have any final thoughts on this particular topic?
I think I think Abhishek mentioned everything almost. I think it's all need based, right? So I think it all depends. I just had a call I think some time back, and I had a 10 slider presentation of a 100 slider deck, and even that was not enough, because it doesn't convey what are those 3 or 4 things that that I'm suggesting for the team to kind of do. So it doesn't converge there. So I think it all depends. I think there is a need to have an elaborate so if you have a qual deck or a foundational research, you would need to understand, right, what customers have said, how are we deriving into that particular insight, and then hence the recommendation. Without that, it will look like this is like something which is very generic in nature, right? So you need to have that understanding. But I think at the same point of time, the synthesis, the newsletters, and I think most importantly in the entire exercise, it's all about, I think, action point, right, at the end of the day. So I think we can have awesome research reports, right? What used to happen before, right? We used to be very proud when we do good piece of research. We know it's good stuff. But right now, I think the expectation which has changed is basically you give me 2 things. You give me 2 insights which can change everything. And what's the holy grail? So I think there is no holy grail, but yeah, 2 things which moves the needle. I think that's the impact. What people or the stakeholders,
yeah. One build on this, and sometimes we tend to be so inward looking from our research perspective. But if I have to, from my own personal experience, if I have to look at my behavior on Twitter, and Twitter I consider as my current university, that's how I would want to see it. because I can, on any topic, I can follow the best thinker in the world and just get the best insights that they are sort of looking at, right? So I think what we can learn from Twitter, just from Twitter, is that if you are adding value to your followers, you will get more followers, you will get engagement. And the best thing about Twitter is that it forces you to Shubhra's point, just 2 points, a one-liner, and still sort of resonates and adds value to people who are reading it. I think that's the goal for us, and we can learn something from how they do it repeatedly on Twitter. It's tough, but I think they're doing it very well. The good creators over there.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think just to add on that Abhishek's point, another behavior which has changed along with Twitter, and it's also a holy grail for me. I think we fall into the same segment. Is this app called InShorts, right? So, Yamin, for your information, it's an app that we have where the entire article is shortlisted into maybe a 50-60 character. So if you just scroll it down, getting up early in the morning, your entire newspaper would be read in within maybe 10 or 15 minutes max. You would cover everything, almost everything, and almost 50 to 100 odd topics, across various channels. That's also, resonates to that point, right? I mean, limitation. I think that quote which Abhishek mentioned, right? Lesser is better, I think, and I think that's very beautifully demonstrated by both these platforms.
It is interesting how social platforms are teaching us to communicate better. We have a question, and this will be our last question that we'll have time to address today because we are at time. And in the chat, and it is, privacy is a major issue that has come up in the tech space. Do you think that will lead to a renaissance of traditional research, qualitative or survey methods? And if so, how can new tech data methods generate insights while protecting privacy? Subra, I'm going to direct this to you since you're in the banking industry.
It's already happening, right? It's already happening. I don't think I think when of doing research good old, I think 12 years back, we had methodologies, we had stuff of, okay, if this happens, then we would do a proto-monadic product test, or we would do a monadic concept test, or something. I think today everything is hybrid. I think the thing that we look for is basically why are we doing research, right? To get some insights or validation of hypothesis, either to understand or generate hypothesis and go deeper, or the other way around. I think tech has just enabled us to kind of help us bridge, because now what happens vis-a-vis a traditional research is today I know I can go to a specific TG, right? I know I can go to a person who have downloaded my app but never transacted. So I don't know why he has downloaded and why he has transacted. Via a traditional way of going to that consumer, I think I won't be able to reach out to that person because it's impossible. And then everything falls flat. That's one. Second thing is that I have a lot of residual behavior of that customer with me, which sets the context, right? So I can eventually ask sharper question and I would get sharper insights, right? So if suppose a lapser, so I exactly know his behavior, what he has done for the last 3 months, his engagement with me, and so on and so forth. I can build on the top of that and I can ask him 3 questions. And I know based on 3 questions, I would be able to derive something. And compared to what it used to be before, I'm sitting with him talking for 1 hour, 15 minutes is all warm-ups and stuff like that. So I think it's also rapid and what we need, right? We go, we talk, we extract, and then we throw it back and then repeat iteration. So I think it's not about renaissance, it's more about adaptability and what we need from the research.
Got it. Abhishek, final thoughts?
No, I agree, and I think at a very high level, research industry has been at the forefront of respecting privacy as well. So I think we've always had ISOMAR code of conduct and MRSI code of conduct as well. So yeah, I think it's a trade-off, and till the time it doesn't get into individual data, this thing privacy breach, I think it helps us sort of reach consumers in a more efficient way as well. So it's a good plus.
Both of you, thank you very much for joining me today on the last session of MRMW. I'm going to click the crowd sound. I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to see right now.
You can try it, yeah.
Yeah, it didn't do anything. Sorry. Okay, that was anticlimactic.
All right, great. What a fantastic conversation to end this conference. So this brings us to the end of MRMW Virtual. Thank you so much again, Jamin, for moderating this, as always, for doing a fantastic job. And Abhishek, for being a part of this. And Shubhra, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to the both of you. And Jamin, again, thanks. Thank you so much. And thank you, a big thank you to all our delegates and attendees for being a part of this conference over the last 2 days, for asking those questions, for being engaged in all the conversations, and to all our sponsors for supporting us this year: Brandwatch, IC Research, Ongale, and Rysense, and to all our association partners and online partners, a big thank you to you as well. And for those of you who are interested and dying to get back to in-person events, those of you in Europe, we have MRMW Europe taking place on the 14th and 15th of September in Berlin. And those of you in APAC, we are back in person. Qual 360 APAC is back on the 8th and 9th of November in person in Singapore. And if you're interested in UX design and UX, we have a UXDG Design Summit, which is virtual, on the 7th and 8th of September this year. All right, thank you so much again for being a part of this conference and for being such lovely delegates. Thank you so much again. See you all soon.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.